So you can always join that as well and save a bit of time. Hello, Isaac. How are you?
Hello, Mr. David. I'm right.
You good?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Hello, Lynn. How are you?
I'm fine.
Fantastic. Great to hear from you. What about you, Ang? All right?
Water. I'm good.
Good. All right. Water. All right. Okay, so we're going to be getting ourselves underway very, very soon, but Foyce, we need to do registers and all of those sorts of things. Oh, Darwish has joined us. How are you, Darwish?
Hello, I am doing very good, thank you.
That's good to hear. That's very good to hear. And Charles as well. Oh, just leaving PSD. What did you have for PSD? What did you do?
We teach to other people in our class. But, yeah.
Okay. Oh, that sounds exciting.
Yo, Darwish. Is that a man holding a sickle?
Yes, hammer and sickle on laptop. That's how you fix a laptop.
Okay. Sounds exciting. Right, now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get ourselves underway. We've got a little bit to do today, and there's a wee activity for you to engage in as well. It has been a couple of days. Hello, Tracy. It has been a couple of days since we last saw you because we had the long weekend. It was a very long weekend, which was very useful. Good to get a little bit of sleep in that as well. Plus, you've got Chinese New Year next week. Woohoo! So a whole week off for that. How about that? That's pretty exciting. Now, yes, so GM9V2 is the code. Now, we'll start us all the way back at the beginning, but that's okay. We can just jump forwards in time and find where we are up to. Right, so I'm just going to hit save on the register. Oh, has Yasin arrived? Not yet. No Yasin yet. Yasin, if you arrive, let me know so I can mark you as present. Present and accounted for. Because otherwise you're not present and accounted for. Okay, what about Wenching?
Hi.
Yes. How are you, Wenching?
I'm fine. Hi.
Good. I'm good. I'm all right. It's what is it today? Thursday. So we've got, one more day till the weekend, which is quite exciting. A bit of a chance to have a rest. Then a long week of holiday, which will be nice to have. All right, so jumping in, please. GM9V2. So I'm going to have a wee look, see who's in. All right, here we go. All right, most of us are in there. If we can, the rest of us can join in. That would be awesome. Thank you. Fantastic. Why do we call ourselves Poppy, Angie?
I don't know.
You don't know? It's just something you do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks to all the AirPods, you call yourself Poppy. It's your other name. I don't know. Maybe that's what you're wanting. All right. So joining in with the Nearpod, that would be fantastic. And we're going to jump forwards in time up to where we need to be. Look at functions of money. That was a while ago now. Features of money.
Wait, Mr. David?
Yeah.
Are we still on the topic money?
No. Well, kind of. What I've done is I've grouped money and consumer decisions together along with trade unions because they're kind of bitsy and small, so I've kind of fit them all together. Like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yep.
Cool. Right. Okay, so we did that one. Central banks, we've looked at. Commercial banks, what they do, why they're important. Stock market, what it does. Types of jobs and incomes earned from those jobs. We looked at how education might change how your income changes over time, and then the difference, right, with different earnings between male and female, but also over the course of your life. We've looked at the labour market, so derived demand and the supply, which is us. And we're talking about what influences those particular curves. And one of the really fascinating parts of it was when we looked at elasticity, and we saw that dependent on the slope, the elasticity of those different curves, you'd end up with different wages being paid. All right? Don't worry about the postings, we'll deal with that in a minute. Okay? So if you were more elastic, okay, so lower skill set, perhaps less productive, all of those sorts of ideas, then maybe you would have a lower wage. Now, we had an issue the other day with the clarity of the video. I think it was the camera. I think there was some dirt on the camera. I have attempted to clean the camera, so hopefully the clarity of the image is all not like you're looking through dirt and oil. Right, can you see it all? Is it all relatively clear?
It's like a bit faded, but it's okay. We can look on the new phone.
You still see it? Okay. Is that brighter? Not entirely sure if it is or not.
It's not that clear, but yeah.
Okay, I might need to ask IT about the camera. Okay.
I think it should be the Google Meet's problem because the quality of the Google Meet video is not that good. So I think it's not on the Google Meet. It's not your camera.
Yeah, could be that. Could be right. It was quite noticeable the other day because I had a year 11 and a year 12, and there was a big difference between the 12 and the 11. No, in fact, a year 10 and year 12. And there was quite a big difference. So, yeah, it could be the meat. You're right. So the point here is that if you are more skilled, okay, so therefore more inelastic, more productive, there's less of you, then the wages are going to be higher. So more elastic, the wages are lower. More inelastic, the wages are higher. So that more specialist skill set, whatever that is going to command a higher wage. So we talked about all of these sorts of ideas. There is differences with regards to your earnings between whether you are skilled and unskilled, whether you have the experience or whether you don't have the experience, whether you have the qualifications or whether you don't have the qualifications. Sometimes the gender, sometimes discrimination actually does impact on wages, etc. Public versus private sector, that's the comment that we make where we say, because the public sector is the government and they quite often aren't necessarily looking at profits. So what we're saying then, what we're suggesting is that they may actually not have as higher wages in the public sector as the private sector, because the private sector is looking to profits. It's potentially hiring the more productive, more skilled people and paying them perhaps higher wages. The difference between particular industries, so the technology industry versus non-technology industries, right? Farming and agriculture versus manufacturing. So there might be different skills required and levels of skills and qualifications required, and so therefore maybe the wages might be different. And likewise, when we talk about that idea of having a special skill set, a special talent, okay, that may make you more inelastic. Again, don't worry about the postings. That's absolutely fine. We'll get to those in a minute. So, all right, as you might be aware, Michael Jordan, best player ever, greatest of all time. Don't get me started, all right? He had a contract worth over $20 million, all right? And for one season, and that was the most, that's the record ever, all right? And if you put it in sort of today's context, that's well over $30, $40 million for one season. Okay, now I know there are basketball players who might be earning multi-million-dollar contracts, but they tend to be several years worth of contract, right? Several years worth of income. So that was a record at the time, and it still stands today. the skill set, the idea of being inelastic, enabled him to earn that higher wage. Right. So there is somebody who's potentially perfectly inelastic. They have the skill set, nobody else can do what they can do. So we are, because of increased demand for that person, prepared to pay higher wages for them. Right. Did we have a look at the minimum wage idea the other day?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Right. Well, when we looked at price floors, you might remember price floors. We talked about minimum prices and maximum prices. Okay. Well, we can put a minimum price on labour. Maybe we're worried that workers aren't earning enough money. Maybe we're thinking they're not going to be able to afford on that wage the actual amount that they need in order to live. So in America at the moment, they're debating $15 US, that amount of money per hour, as a minimum wage. So that therefore would be a legally set lowest level of wages that could possibly be paid for workers. With the idea being is that if it was found out that you were paying less than that, then the government could take you to court with regards to it, could fine you lots of amounts of money, potentially. Problem with that, as we saw, same as it's a market. So as soon as you put a minimum wage in place, you're going to encourage more and more people to try to work in that industry, because the wages are up, they're higher. But it's going to cost more for the producers. So there is going to be less and less quantities demanded. So the gap between those two is actually going to potentially rise. So although it sounds really good that wages have risen because of a minimum wage, right, maybe you're actually hurting the people that you're trying to help. Because a business, they're still going to hire the most productive worker first. They're going to hire the most skilled worker first. So those people who are less skilled, less experienced, less qualified, they're going to be the last ones to possibly be hired. In the supermarket, we had an expression which was last in, first off. Okay, the idea being the last person hired would be the first one to lose their job in the event of, needing to ask people to leave because costs had risen or any other sort of circumstance. All right. Now, what does it look like? Can we model it? And the answer is yes, we can, because Bob the Builder says so. That's what it looks like, just as we've seen before, a minimum price. But in this case, it's a minimum price for workers. There it is, minimum wage. Now, lots of countries around the world have got minimum wages. You might be quite surprised at this. You might know whether Malaysia has a minimum wage. You might know of America, you might know of South Korea, whether South Korea has a minimum wage. You might know Italy, Spain, do they have minimum wages? Right? Lots of countries actually do. New Zealand does have a minimum wage. Right? When I was in the supermarket, and I know that was a long, long time ago, the minimum wage when I started was $3.50 per hour, $3 New Zealand dollars 50 per hour. So again, multiply that by about 4 to get Malaysian ringgit, and you're kind of thinking what that is. Now, $3.50, oh, there's a lot of squealing outside, lots of enjoyment going on with the early years kids. So $3.50, that was quite a lot at the time. But the people who were employed before me, they were earning less than that as the minimum wage. In fact, some of the workers, a couple of years before me, they were actually only earning $2.50 an hour, which you're going to think, wow, that's crazy. But this is New Zealand a long, long time ago, right? In a galaxy far, far away. Yeah. Right. So what is happening here? Well, here we go. This is exactly what we said. The same deal with regards to a minimum price happens with a minimum wage. So because the wage is higher, you're going to see an increase in supply of workers. Right? Workers want an increase in quantity supplied of workers. They want to work because the wages are higher. Previously, they'd said, yeah, no, I don't really want to work. I'm just going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. All right? Now that wages are higher, wow, let's go and get a job. Of course, that increase in supply, here it is, that supply, is different from the demand here because now it costs more. So there's a gap here, and that gap is actually unemployment. So by potentially trying to help people, we have created unemployment. And as said, the minimum wage isn't going to affect the brain surgeons, it's not going to affect the rocket scientists, it's going to affect those who work in the supermarkets, those who work in the cleaning industry, those jobs, those job markets where there is a more elastic market. They're the ones who are going to be hit by this, okay? Now, as said, America is looking at increasing their minimum wage because it's currently somewhere around $8 US an hour, depending on the state that you're in. They're looking at increasing it to $15 US per hour. So what does that mean? So what we've got here is we've got a wee flow chart, and feel free to grab this and chuck it into your notes. Just screenshot it from the slides or grab it from the slides and put it in your notes. But if we increase the minimum wages, then yeah, there's likely to be more automation occurring. There's likely to be, because of the increase in costs of labour, there's likely to be more people wanting to work, okay? So potentially there's costs involved with that for the business, so they might say, well, let's do robots instead of people. Let's have more capital goods instead of labour. But there could be productivity growth. There's a possibility of that, right? As you move, though, the workers, they get higher wages. Woohoo! All right? They're the ones who go out and buy goods and services. They go buying goods and services, and then you've got increase in derived demand for other goods and services. So that might actually cause the economy to grow, potentially. Right? Then if you look here, though, at the other side, you might suggest that it is raising the costs for businesses to have the minimum wage rise. As the costs for businesses rise, it might cause the costs of goods and services to also rise, which affects us. All right? And of course, because those costs rise, there could be less quantities demanded for those goods, then less jobs, and of course the costs of labour rise, so there's less demand for the labour. Yeah. So we actually don't know necessarily the end result of this, but what I'm illustrating to you is called a balanced argument, where we're looking at the advantages and the disadvantages, helpfully colour-coded as green and red. Right? Green for the advantages and red for the disadvantages. Now that's quite a good approach to take if you're looking at an extended response question in an exam which talks perhaps about a case study. The American economy is looking at increasing their minimum wage to $15 per hour. Should they do it? Right? Explain whether or not this is a good idea. Here's some advantages, here's some disadvantages, tick, 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 8 marks, just like that. All right? So that could be a whole page, an A4 side of writing. Right? You could also bring up the idea about elasticity. You could. Right? You could also talk about those different labour markets. It might have an impact greater on the agricultural industry or the agricultural labour market than the technological labour market. Those sorts of ideas as well. Remember, the government employs people as well, so it's going to have an impact on the government's budget. If more people are unemployed, it's going to have an impact on the government's budget. Right? So all of those things could be added, depending on the level of depth that you're able to go into at the time. But a good way to lay it out. Advantages, disadvantages. Now, I've got a couple of practice questions here. Just, they're in the slides. You can work through them as revision. The first one says, why might there be a shortage of nurses in a country? Next one says, why might nurses in the Philippines move to London? The third one says, what can a government do to attract people to jobs where there might be a shortage? Right? It might be that they're offering to pay them air travel and pay them accommodation and make sure that they can get the jobs in the country. They might be prepared to offer subsidies to the employers so that their wages are higher. There could be all sorts of different approaches that governments could take, particularly if there are shortages involved. So you can work through those there in the slides. Now, this is the bit that's really meaty. Okay, this is the bit where we start saying, well, we've got a labour market, what does the government do? Right? Maybe we're not happy with the labour market, we're not happy with the way workers are treated. Well, the government can interfere and put employment rights in there, pay and conditions. Right? Remember, it's not that long ago that children were working. It's really not. It's not that long ago that we're, sending children up the chimneys to clean the chimneys. I know that's when we had chimneys, yeah? The idea of childhood is quite a modern invention. The idea of teenagers and teenage years is actually an even more modern invention. It came about, I think, in like the 70s, around about the 70s, 60s. 60s to 70s, they created the teenagers, right? Because there wasn't one. You were just a young adult, okay? And then you became an adult when you were 21, right? That's the law, how it was. Okay? But employment rights, what protections are there for you? You need a safe working environment, obviously at the moment, SOPs, right, from the government. You need a safe working environment. You want air conditioning, you want lights, you want, okay, all of those sorts of things. What about hours of work? How long would you expect to work in a business? The government can put laws in place that say you're not allowed to work longer than this amount, okay? Now, the average amount of time people work at a job, if you look at what the media will tell you, it's around 40 hours, okay? Now, that idea came about a little while ago because people viewed 8 hours working during the day and 5 days working to be a good amount of time to work. So therefore, 40 hours was the average. Doesn't mean everybody is working 40 hours. It just means that was considered to be a good practice for people. Then they had a weekend, right, that they could spend with their friends and their family. So the government can put all sorts of laws in. It might be about hiring practices like discrimination laws. It is actually in many parts of the world illegal to discriminate when you're hiring. Well, the government had to put those laws in place. Otherwise, businesses would be perhaps picking and choosing who they wanted to hire. I don't know. Yeah, they might. Protecting employees. What about trade unions? That's the next bit that we're going to be looking at. The idea that you can have a group of workers who collect together, joining their power to become one giant robot. No, joining their power together. Joke about joining robots.
For the last time, no.
Right. So the workers join together. They collect their power together so that they can, as a group, negotiate with the employer. That's called a trade union. And it might be about hiring practices. It might be about employment practices. It might be about job contracts. It might be about the pay that you earn. They can negotiate and sort out all sorts of things. It might be that there's legal trouble, in which case the trade union might actually help you sort that out. They might help you figure out what lawyers to find. All of those sorts of things. Trade unions are quite powerful in some parts of the world. But essentially what they're doing is they are negotiating with employers about pay and conditions for employees. Which is that. All right? Quite often you'll see unions protesting, okay? There have been quite a number of union protests around the world, and that tends to be when you hear about trade unions the most. But they are there in the background. As said, there's a good definition. Group of workers banding together to try and help with rights, pay, conditions, all of those sorts of ideas. There are several tools that they have. The first two big ones, here's the first one, collective bargaining. Because they're a group as opposed to one person, they're more powerful when they are negotiating pay rises, for example. If it's just one person going to the boss, may I have a pay rise, please? The boss is possibly going to say, no, go away. But because there might be several workers, hundreds, thousands, who knows, all in the union, all walking together to the boss, we'd like a pay rise, please. the boss is possibly more likely to say, oh dear, yes, I will give you a pay rise. That's the idea, okay? They're grouping together so that their bargaining power is bigger, stronger. They also have another weapon, which is kind of like the ultimate nuclear deterrent. It's called a strike. And not that kind of strike. The strike that we're talking about here is when you say, I'm not going to do the work. You're employed to do the job, but you're just refusing to do it. And if it's a whole group of workers refusing to work, then it can be very expensive for a business. You think about the lost productivity. You think about all that output that then isn't manufactured and isn't sold, and the revenues that are lost, and the profits, okay? And if you had to then look at hiring more people because your people were off striking to hire more people, then, you know, you've got that cost as well. So strikes tend to be a very big, quite nuclear deterrent. We will strike if you don't do this. Should be the last resort. But they do have other weapons, all right? Now, obviously, negotiation is the best thing that unions can do. They can sit down with the employers, they can have a chat, they can say, these are our concerns, what do you think? Try and map them all out, try and figure it out. But they can also do something called a go slow, which means you're still doing your job, you're just doing it at a much slower pace. Yeah, I'll get to that email, I won't respond to it right now, I'll get to it later, it's all right. I'll finish the work, but just not right now. I'll do it, it's done, it's just, yeah. So a go slow, you're working, but you're working at the minimum that you can do with regards to time. What's called a work to rule is one of their next big tools, right? The union can say, right, we're moving to a work to rule. And it's pretty exactly as sounds. You look at what the rules say you have to do in your job, and that's all you do. The point being is that you're not doing anything beyond that. You're not doing anything extra, okay? Now, a lot of businesses do actually require people to do extra on top of the work that they do. But it's very hard in an employment contract to write a whole lot of extra things that you have to do. Yeah? For example, teaching, okay? In more or less every single teaching contract I've ever signed, there's a wee clause in there that says, and other duties as the principal or head of school says. Well, and other duties can mean a whole range of different things, but they're not specified. They're not actually individually listed. So the work to rule idea tends to suggest, well, yeah, it's not specified, so I don't do it. Or the other one is about overtime, so it could be an overtime ban, which means that you only work the required number of hours that you have, right? So you're employed to work 8 hours, you work 8 hours, then you stop, yeah? And a lot of businesses, again, will ask you to work overtime shifts. We need to get this order out, we need everybody on board, we've got this to happen, please will you do extra work? According to this, no, yeah? And of course, as said, that strike action idea. The idea that you can have a strike, stop work altogether, and the business basically shuts down. Yeah. Now, there's a really big history behind all of this. Okay. In America, there was a big business. They weren't treating their workers very well at all. Right? Pay and conditions were pretty terrible. This is a long time ago. Okay. And what happened was the workers decided together that they would lock themselves into the business and stop work and, right, let's see what they do now, sort of idea. They're not listening to us and our demands. So the business, believe it or not, and I know it was a while back, but the business hired people with guns to go into the business and threaten them, right, to open up the business and to get out so that they could bring other workers in to do the job. Of course, the people in the business said, no, we're not going out. The people with the gun said, well, if you don't come out, we'll shoot you, and they shot them. And a whole lot of people died, and there was panic and people running all over the shop. Yeah. Now, it was a long time ago, so you won't necessarily know that. It is America that I'm talking about. Now, right, the history of this does involve a very significant American family, and the family are called the Rockefellers. Okay. So if you have been to America, or if you've watched any American movies or films about America, you might have seen a place called the Rockefeller Center. Now that Rockefeller Center was created by the Rockefeller family as a result of them thinking, oh dear, we've gone too far, we need to give money back to the American economy. We're going to create a center for the arts. We'll put a lot of money into it, right? And people will then start liking us again, because the people really didn't like them, because they were the ones who'd sent the people in with the guns. Okay. Now that was a long time ago. There's a really good documentary called "The Men Who Built America." It's on YouTube. You can download all the episodes, and it talks about people like Henry Ford. Talks about the Rockefellers, talks about the creation of the railroads. There's all sorts of different people in there. And it explains how they all went about their personal motivations, the histories behind the industries. It's actually quite an interesting documentary if you have the time. But one of the things that a bit of a caveat if you are watching it, just be careful, because there are some modern people who are in it as well, who are asked for kind of like historical understanding, and who are asked to talk about what the documentary says. And one of those people is the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Before he was president, when he was just business person, Donald Trump, he was asked about the business of the time, in any case. But it was a bit of a surprise. Oh, there he is, right? So strike action. As a result of that, the government then started putting laws in place about employment. The government started allowing unions, started allowing negotiations between employers and employees to happen. That's why all of this started to happen, right? Now, depending on the job you're in, there are a whole range of different unions, right? In the grocery supermarket business, we had the Grocery Workers Union, we had the Retail Distribution Workers Union, right? There was just all a mesh of them. But you can have craft unions. Those are unions specific to a particular skill set, right? They're probably one of the oldest types of unions that there are, okay? But you can imagine that, so the specific skill, like the carpenters, for example, the people who make things out of wood, they might have their own union, or plumbers, electricians, those sorts of people. Industrial unions, they're the ones who are unions based on an entire industry. You've also got general unions, which are just for anybody. You can just join, depending on whatever job you're in. And then there's one here, just in case this turns up, white-collar unions. Those are unions for what are a bit pejorative, but professional workers. So again, we're talking a long time ago. In the old days, if you were considered a professional worker, if your job was to be considered skilled, you were qualified, you were that more inelastic with regards to your supply, then typically you'd go to work wearing a shirt and tie. And back in those days, all of the shirts and ties, all of the shirts at any rate, were white. Okay? So therefore a white collar. So if you are a professional, you'd be wearing a shirt and tie to work, and therefore you'd have a white collar. And they talk about people in those jobs who commit crimes. They quite often will call it white collar crime. That's where that expression comes from. Okay, all right. So those are different types of unions, and I put them there just in case in the exam you might get a a case study. And in the case study, it talks about one of those. Essentially, they're all unions, so the same rules apply. It's just that they're a union for specific groups. All right, there are lots of famous examples, as I said, about the men who built America, but there are others. There's the NBA lockout. Yeah, hello, Tracy.
Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? I haven't finished writing.
Yep.
Thank you.
That one. All right.
Okay, I took a screenshot. It's cut. You can move on now. Thank you.
No problem. There are lots of famous examples, and in the slides in the site, you will be able to find, these are all linked. Okay, so there are information about all of these in there. Now, the NBA, which we're all familiar with, right? You know that there are players, and then there are managers, and then there are owners, the actual owners of the team. And you might be very familiar with who all of these people are, or you might not. It doesn't really matter. But the owners tend to be, in the past at any rate, have tended to be very wealthy business people. And the players weren't, in the past, earning, other than the Michael Jordans of this world, they weren't earning a whole lot of money. When you started getting successive basketball players who are very, very talented, all of a sudden it became, well, we're not earning enough. Can we have contracts that help us earn more? What about endorsement deals? You know, what are the rules and regulations with those? And eventually they were trying to negotiate with the owners, and they couldn't come to an agreement. And the owners were so upset with the basketball players that they actually locked them out. Go away, right? And the season was shortened. There was all sorts of, you know, trauma and drama about it, and you had to fix it all and get to the finals somehow, and all of that, you know, obviously happened as a result. But they did figure it out, and it has led to now a more equitable distribution of wealth amongst NBA players. Not entirely, they're not like giving everybody exactly the same, but it is more equitable than what it was, and they're also allowing players to have more endorsement deals, and there's still a lot of rules and regulations. And if you are an NBA follower, you'll be aware about things like the shoes that they wear, okay, and there are rules about which shoes they're allowed to wear and which ones they aren't. And they can actually get fined for wearing the wrong shoes, okay? But they may have an endorsement deal with the company who makes those shoes, and that endorsement deal might actually be bigger than the fine. So Michael Jordan, for example, he used to get fined pretty much every time he stepped on the basketball court because his shoes were not officially sanctioned, okay? And there are lots of those sorts of rules and regulations in the NBA. You might be also familiar with the writer and agent dispute that happened in Hollywood. That meant that a lot of TV shows at a certain point, they were stopped because the writers and the agents couldn't agree on pay and conditions. So the writers just said, no, we're not writing anymore. That's it. We're stopping. So there were a number of TV shows that just stopped. It was all of it, you were watching it, never. But what happened? But right? And until they negotiated and sorted all of that out, nothing happened. And there's still issues with that even today. You will find actors, they are part of a union, and you have to be a member of the union to do certain movies and other, you know, there's a lot of that involved. And all of the production people who are involved with movies, they're all in craft unions. So they're specialists, you know, technicians who build things, and electricians, and so they're all in unions too. So it can be quite a negotiation between the producers of movies and the people involved with regards to it. There was a very big strike in Hong Kong, right? And it was just the other year, and it lasted a really long time. So you're probably quite familiar with that one. Then there's this idea of air travel disruption. Pilots have tried to, in varying countries around the world, will try to renegotiate their wages. And because Christmas time, lots of people fly, obviously Chinese New Year, although obviously in the moment they're not, but lots of people will try to travel at those peak times, and pilots might say, we're not flying. Until you negotiate with us, we're not doing it. Yeah. So there's some examples, you can look those ones up. They're good case studies. But we also need to understand that unions haven't lasted with regards to their strength. Sometimes some unions, like the ones, the NBA ones, the professional ones that are connected to the movies and Hollywood, some of those unions, yes, they've gotten really, really big. Okay. If you want to see a big disparity between the unions for Hollywood, have a look at the difference between the stunt actors and the actors and what they're allowed to do for Hollywood as opposed to what they were allowed to do in Hong Kong and China. Yeah, quite a big difference. But over time, unions have actually become now less strong overall. And that's partly because governments around the world have said, I don't know about unions, they're restricting business, they're adding to the costs. Let's put laws in place that mean you don't have to belong to a union. And as soon as they do that, people stop belonging to unions, because to belong to a union, you actually have to pay membership fees, kind of like a sports club. Now, again, this is the idea about the whether or nots, okay? Those questions that are 6 to 8 marks, and this is advantages and disadvantages and advantages of trade unions on the economy, right? So it talks about how they represent workers. Woo! It talks about how there are impacts on productivity. It talks about how workers are potentially more productive. But it does say that they might cause unemployment, that they might cause the costs of production to rise, that there might be issues with productivity and output. It does. I mean, it can be confrontational. Right? You want management and the employees to have a good working relationship, but unions can go "Rah," and cause it to be a little bit confrontational. And I've dealt with a lot of unions in my time, and I've seen it right, firsthand, how confrontational sometimes they can be. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, here's what happens now. And I know I've gone through a whole lot of material. Please grab that from the slides, whack it in your notes. Because here's what I want you to do. I'm going to change the screen. I'm going to present my screen. All right. Now, here's what I want you to do. In the classroom, this one, I have added a couple of things for you to have a go at. This one, I'll look at, no, well, firstly, there's some multi-choice. All right, and there's 10 questions in the multi-choice. You can have a go at those, right? Won't take you particularly long, but that would be a good thing to do. Next one is this one here. And this is actually practice questions. I'm going to change the time. Yeah, don't worry about the due date, because that's a bit close. Now, so here's what happens for you fellas. There's a wee case study. Then I've got a part A here, which is a definition. So identify 2 reasons why someone may choose to train to become a dentist. Then underneath that, there's another case study. And then there's a part D. So part Ds are the bigger questions. All right, so discuss whether an economy would benefit from an increase in the strength of its unions. Oh dear, look at me. That's quite fortuitous of what you've just covered today. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to write a document answering those 2 questions. Part A, oops, here, and then part D. Now, you will then put the link to your document in the cell next to your name. So Andy, you'll put yours there. Then what I've got here is I've got what's called a critical friend, right? That critical friend, they're also going to post the doc with their information in it, but they're then going to give you feedback. So Charles, you'll give Andy some feedback, right? What you think of his work, okay? Did he write it well? Did he explain both sides of the argument with regards to whether an economy should benefit, all right? And you, in your feedback, are going to give them a mark. You're going to give them a mark out of 10. All right? Connor, you'll be connected with Darwish, Janelle with Lynn, Isaac, Tracy, Wenching with Yasin, and Andy, Anyi, you're with Yasin as well. Now, Yasin, I've done him twice, but he only has to do his writing once. But I would like him to do 2 lots of feedback. The reason why is because we're 1 short of even numbers, basically. That's the only reason why that is the case. Right? If Yasin isn't available, then I'll change this. Darwish! Be there. Right, now I've given you a hint about the feedback. For the question A, give them 1 mark per accurate reason as to why they might want to train to be a dentist. Now, D is the for and against. So you're wanting up to 5 marks for why it might be of benefit to an economy to have a stronger trade union. So stronger trade unions may do what? And then you want up to 5 marks for why it may not. However, stronger trade unions may lead to ... So you're wanting, you know, a good 3 points here and a good 3 points here, a total of 8 marks for that. And you give them the mark and it goes into your feedback, right? Because you're their critical friend. I'm going to stop sharing. Back to the meet. Now, that's what I'd like you to do. Now, I have put a deadline on that of tomorrow because we've got a little bit of time left, but maybe only enough time to do your MCQ. Okay? So if you don't get time to do the 8 and the 2 mark question, the extended response question today, that's fine. Just do the multiple choice and work on the extended response one tomorrow, okay, or over the weekend, right? You've got Chinese New Year to think about, okay? But do have a go at that. That would be a really good thing to do. Are there any particular questions as to what I'm wanting you to do?
So do we just answer the question like on like another doc, and then we just put our link to the table?
Yes, for the extended response, you will create a doc, put your answer in that doc, then you'll put your link into the table next to your name. Then your critical friend, they'll put their link in. Now, yes, there might be a time difference between when your link arrives and their link, okay? And that's okay too, right? Then you click on their link, they click on yours, they read your work, they give you some feedback, and they give you a mark. All right, peer review is what we're calling it. Okay. Any other particular questions? Okay. Well, I am available over email should you need it. Otherwise, as we'd say in the land of my birth, hei konera, which means goodbye for now. Have a fantastic day, and I won't see you before. If I don't hear from you before, have a great Chinese New Year break, and we will see you after the break.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you, Mr. David.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. You still here, Andy?
See you. Bye.
Bye.